continuing. This is a different patrol. As I ground out my last cigarette of the day and gave the order to saddle up, the men began getting to their feet and donning their packs and flak jackets. Almost simultaneously, the sickening whoosh of mortar rounds interrupted my mechanical direction, and suddenly our hilltop was the center of a firestorm. The first 4 or 5 rounds were long and impacted harmlessly on the reverse slope of the hill behind us. But as we dropped to our hands and knees, I sensed that the enemy mortarmen would quickly adjust their fire to compensate for their miscalculation. The firing seemed to be coming from a tree line near the leper colony and directly across the valley from us. And as I pondered our predicament, machine gun fire began to sweep downslope in front of our position. We were pinned down on the flat area atop a hill, but the angle was such that the automatic weapons fired could not reach the men unless they rose from the prone position that by now most of the platoon had assumed. One young Marine who had joined the platoon just prior to our operation in the DMZ suddenly stood up and began firing his rifle John Wayne fashion from the hip. Before I could pull him down beside me, a well-aimed round from the tree line leveled him and made further effort on my part unnecessary. Within seconds, Doc Ellis was beside the wounded Marine, medical kit in hand, as he quickly affixed a battle dressing to what turned out to be a minor head wound. Now, just to make sure everyone's clear on this, firing mortars is difficult to be accurate, and you do something called bracketing, which is you fire 1 round or maybe 2 or 3 rounds and you see where they land, and then you make an adjustment from it. So the first rounds hit long. Anybody that knows anything knows that the next rounds are going to be shorter. They may not be directly on you, but it usually takes, you go long, then you go short, and then you split the difference and you're in a hit. So that's the situation they're in. Back to the book. As I refocused my attention on the activity in the tree line, I realized that while the enemy machine gun was ineffective in reaching us, it would keep us from counterattacking. I also knew that the mortar fire was going to decimate us if we stayed put and allowed the enemy soldiers time to adjust it. As if in response to the thought of the next barrage began, and I could feel the whistling rounds working their way up the hill behind us. By now, many of the Marines on the forward edge of our line were returning fire from their prone position, and because we were above the enemy soldiers, we could fire directly into the trees. Not long after the second barrage had begun, however, the tree line from which it was being directed suddenly exploded into balls of fire. So the position where the enemies was all of a sudden just explodes into balls of fire. And I belatedly realized that my own mortar team was laying down its own barrage of suppressing fire. Looking over my shoulder, I saw one of the team members on his knees holding the mortar tube against its base plate while his 2 comrades were furiously shoveling rounds into its open end. Within seconds of our return fire, the enemy unit broke contact, and as we lay there in stillness, I could hardly believe how desperate the situation had been just moments earlier. My mortar section's quick action had probably saved us from wholesale casualties, and I was horrified to realize that in the course of the firefight, it had never occurred to me to order them to commence firing. So, huge lesson learned there. It's decentralized command. And going beyond decentralized command, if he would have been a micromanager and trained guys to only do what he said to do, they would have been dead.
Have done it, yeah.
So that is why this is a classic example of why decentralized command is so important. Actually, someone just asked me on social media, and we'll probably answer this in a Q&A, but because it's a long answer, why, if decentralized command is so good, then why doesn't everyone do it? Well, decentralized command is the only way that works. And I've answered that question or talked around it many times, and it's in the book Extreme Ownership. But here's an example of what happens if you don't use decentralized command. And luckily, they had it. Not really by Lou Puller's guidance either, just like by chance.
Yeah.
Like the Marines were trained.
Right. Yeah.
They were ready. And I'll tell you what, if you see, and I don't know if I've ever seen an Army mortar team work in the field on immediate action drills. I'm sure they're outstanding, but I have seen the Marine Corps, and it's beautiful. The Marine Corps on mortars, like they're just awesome.